There are some people who they're 22 years old, they're getting their bachelor's degree and they win a job at the New York Philharmonic and they're done. Or maybe straight out of the master's, they get a job, never take an audition again. But that's not how it is for a lot of us. For those of us who are not in that boat, we have to be very, very accountable for our own continued development.
This conversation I had with Karl Fenner made me realize so much why I love chatting with people that have won major auditions. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contra-Bass Conversations, and we are on the line today with Atlanta Symphony bassist Karl Fenner. And Karl is a past member of the Colorado Symphony. We talk about that, his whole audition journey. In fact, the Colorado Symphony was his 5th audition. His Atlanta Symphony audition was his 21st audition. This is a deep dive into mindset, having a goal in mind, a long-term goal, persevering, finding new ways to level up and develop, and just so many great topics. I can't say enough good things about Karl and about this conversation with Karl. I know you're going to love it. We talk at first about Karl's early years growing up in Houston and his early bass teachers from Dennis Whitaker and Sandor Ostlund into his degree program at the Cleveland Institute with Max Dimoff. And then the second part of this conversation is all about auditioning and Karl's journey through auditioning. And I asked my traditional question, what advice would you give your younger self? And then we chatted for a while longer, quite a while longer, actually, maybe 20, 30 minutes about low points on the journey. And I just am so glad that we got into that topic because it's so easy to look at somebody who's had success in auditions, which Karl absolutely has. He's a member of one of the United States great orchestras and a past member of the Colorado Symphony, which is another great orchestra in the country. And you might look at somebody with Karl's background and think, wow, good for him, very easy. Well, that's the furthest thing from the truth. And learning about what happens when things don't go your way or don't go the way you imagined. How do you stick with your long-term goals and adjust course? This reminds me of conversations I've read with Olympic athletes and with anybody who's achieved at a high level. So you're going to love this discussion for sure. I know it. We got some great sponsors today, Robertson & Sons, D'Addario Strings, and Upton Bass. More on them after this first part with Karl Fenner, all about his background and upbringing in Houston. Here we go. Who did you study with in high school? I see that you studied with Dennis Whitaker at some point. Was he your high school teacher?
He was my teacher my senior year in high school. My very first teacher was in 8th grade, and that was Robert Stiles, who is now the music librarian of the Detroit Symphony. But at the time, he was getting his master's degree at Rice. And then he handed me off to Sandor Ostlund, who was also getting his degrees at Rice at the time. And I studied with him for 3 years. And then my senior year with Dennis Whitaker.
Are you from a musical family, or are you a lone wolf? How did that work for you?
In terms of doing it for a career, definitely a lone wolf. Everyone in my family played a musical instrument at some point. My parents, in high school and junior high, and my other siblings too. But, I was the only one who wanted to continue on as a career.
So Cleveland, so you studied with Max at Cleveland, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Why, I mean, great teacher, great place to go. But why Cleveland for you? What made that the pick for you at that point in your life?
Well, a couple of things. The first thing was that, when I was in high school, I was fortunate enough to go to a performing arts high school that had a nice little music section in the library. And so I would check out records of, classics, Reiner, Chicago, Zell, Cleveland, Munch, Boston, things of that nature. And I did that all, and kind of fell in love with these orchestras. Cleveland specifically, that kind of, I would say, got me leaning in that direction. And then when I was at the ISB convention in 1997 as a 15-year-old, Max Dimoff had just won the principal audition in Cleveland, and he was one of the headliners at the convention and gave a recital. And I remember being so impressed at his approach to playing the bass, how effortless it was to watch him play, and the ease with which he moved around the instrument, and the overall just refinement in everything that he did. But he didn't teach at CIM at the time. And so I remember kind of in the back of my head, I said, well, if he ever teaches there, I'll look into that. And then my senior year, I saw in the old print Bassline newsletter that he had just been hired as head of the bass department. So I immediately called Dennis Whitaker, and I said, and it was actually after deadlines and everything that I saw this. So I called Dennis Whitaker, and he said, oh yeah, we went to school together at Northwestern. I'll give him a call, and I had no idea they knew each other, but they needed more bass players. They needed more applicants. So it worked out for me to send everything in late, and flew up there, saw the scene, had a lesson, and it just kind of, it was that gut feeling that just tells you that this is right.
Well, a lot of people that know Max might know of, he's for years had this technique packet floating around, with all these exercises. And, I've chatted with him several times, but what was he like as a teacher? What were those years like for you at Cleveland?
Well, I mean, I learned all of his packet before there was a packet.
Okay.
He just would show me in lessons and kind of write it out shorthand, which I still have in my lesson tablets from back then. And so the first year especially, we spent a lot of time doing that, kind of gradually incorporating new exercises into it until we had the whole thing. And then through some of my sophomore year, he would still ask me to play certain aspects of the technique routine in my lesson to make sure I was sticking with it, It was good for me because when I went to school, I definitely needed a lot of technique work, especially with my left hand. My left hand was just like, wet noodles trying to play the bass. So we spent a good bit of time doing that. But, the point that Max would always incorporate is it had to be in tune. There had to be a quality sound all the time. And the phrase had to be going somewhere always. And so that's stuck in my head since that time. My first year or two, he was hard on me. There was a lot of stopping me and saying, okay, that's not in tune. Let's fix it. What are we going to do about that? And things of that nature. I really enjoyed my time there. I think I was his first student at CIM, and something I've always kind of been proud of.
Well, I'm sure he's proud to have you as a student. And I was just entering on, with his New Michigan job. He sent me a list of past students to include on the website, and so your name's right there. Sure. That technique routine that he does and that you did, is that something? Because I think he does that, or he did do that every day, right? He was pretty disciplined with that. Is that something that you've kept up, or some version of that, or is something like that? Do you have like a daily practice like that right now?
Yeah, I've kept up some form of daily technique work. And when I was studying at CIM, I pretty much, exclusively did that. Over the years, I've kind of moved things in and out of the routine, tried different things. But there are still aspects of it that I do, almost every day. And for the things that I don't do that often, I'll replace it with something that works on the same concept,
Yeah.
So one way or another, it still had a very lasting impact.
So like these days, like what does that daily practice look like for you in terms of like, is it a half hour, an hour, 20 minutes? Do you use scales, shifting drills? Like what's a typical this technique regimen look like for you like right now?
It depends on the day, and it depends on how much time I have.
Right.
If I have there will be some time in the week where I will have a couple hours where I can just, I can do everything I want with that. I try to find a couple days in the week where I can. Otherwise, an hour, 45 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is, I'll decide ahead of time based on however much time I have in the day and what I need to work on that day. And I'll set a timer for that amount of time. And I'll just kind of, as I'm doing it, kind of mentally map out, how I'm going to make this work, which exercises and for how much time I'm going to do it, knowing that I only have whatever it might be, 20 minutes, 30 minutes or so. The technique that I do, it's some variation on scales, arpeggios, bowing exercises, double stops, and some finger dexterity work. Some combination of those things.
Do you have, and everybody's different with this sort of thing, but I always think it's interesting to hear, like you pull that bass out of the case and you rosin up the bow or whatever, get in tune, and then is there something you do just to start off every practice session, like just some open strings, or do you just dive right into something? Do you have just a sort of an initiation exercise to get the ball rolling for the day?
Yeah, I mean, for years I've started off with open strings. Honestly, open strings. I'll put the metronome on 60, and I'll start off just doing one beat per bow, and expand that to 2, 3, 4, and then kind of turn it into a long tone / slow bow drill. And sometimes I'll, if I don't have much time, I might start off with whole notes and then move on to 8 notes per bow and then try 16, and that kind of a thing. It's sort of abbreviated if that's all the time that I have. But I like doing that to get me acquainted with the instrument and to also kind of establish a good sound. I find that to be very important. It's one thing that I learned from playing the trombone. I actually played the trombone for 7 years.
Did you really? Wow.
Yeah. I started both instruments at the same time in 6th grade and played both through high school. But that's something that's talked about so much in brass pedagogy that I transferred to my string pedagogy, but didn't have a lot of teachers, whether in orchestra or whatnot, string teachers really talking about that much, the importance of tone. Like from day one in, Texas public school band, you're told if your tone isn't good, then no one cares about your technique.
Yeah.
And that was not ever put to me in that way from any string teacher. But I learned it from having played the trombone, and I think it's had a big effect on my concept of sound. So essentially, I start off my day with long tones, just like I would if I was a brass player.
I'm picturing all those trombone players and horn players at Northwestern when I was going to school there, out on the lawn, when it was nice days out and playing long tones. That's totally how brass players practice, isn't it? It's fascinating. When you're getting, so you were talking about just like some left-hand dexterity exercises, and I want to talk about auditions and other stuff too, but I just love to dig into a couple other things. Like, do you do anything in terms of velocity in the bow on a regular basis? Do you have some like Sevchik style exercises you like to go through? Or what do you do to, after you get out of that long tone phase and you start to work with a little more velocity type playing on the bow? What do you do?
I spent a lot of years doing Hal Robinson's Sevchik book, and I occasionally will revisit that. I studied for a number of summers with Albert Laszlo at Aspen, and there's an exercise that he has called Around the Dial, and it works on articulation in the frog, middle, and tip of the bow. We're working on making it as consistent as possible in those areas, but also you go 2 clicks at a time, speeding it up. And then you get around to a point where you lengthen the note value that the beats are covering, so that it basically continues to get faster and faster as you go all the way around the dial. And that's one thing I've done. I have some exercises that I've come up with myself that help me, that kind of incorporate both finger dexterity and fast bow strokes together, that I'll spend time doing almost every day too.
And that around the dial exercise, Ira Gold, who I also spent a couple summers in Aspen studying with Laszlo. Yeah, I remember him showing me that exercise, and I just found that totally fast. It like when I would do that exercise, it's almost like it brought my articulation into focus somehow. Like I would do that, and then I would sit down and start working on excerpts or whatever. And it just, I found it totally fascinating working on that. Is that something you still do these days?
Yeah,
it is. Okay, cool.
I do it regularly, not every day, but certainly, more than once in a week, I'll take the time to do it. And sometimes I'll abbreviate it. Instead of doing 2 clicks, and I'll do 4 clicks each time, to spend, because it can take a while. But, when I started doing that regularly, I would say that the best analogy I can think of is that my bow arm, it just feels like I'm standing on solid ground. Mm-hmm. It's like I'm not balancing on one leg anymore. Like everything just feels grounded after doing that.
Okay, now Karl and I get into the audition journey, and this is where things get real deep. Break up the notepad, folks. Unless you're driving, then listen later. But this is full of so many inspiring moments, actionable things you can do in your own playing. You're totally going to love it. Before we get into that, I'd like to thank the folks that help keep the lights on here at Contrabass Conversations, Robertson & Sons Violins. If you are looking for a double bass or a bow, you come to the right place with Robertsons. I'm a huge fan of them, and they've done so much for the bass community over the past 40 plus years. They have a phenomenal collection of basses. If you haven't been to Albuquerque, New Mexico, maybe you've seen them at the International Society of Bassists convention or somewhere else. Regardless, their instrument collection is top notch. And if you have any way of doing so, go to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Fantastic town, by the way. My wife's from there. Love visiting there. And go to the Robertsons shop. Check out their 3 instrument showrooms and their beautiful recital hall. What a perfect space to try out basses. You'll be floored. You won't want to leave. I was there. I was like a kid in a candy store trying out all these beautiful basses from 100 years ago, 200 years ago, over 200 years ago. My goodness. What a fantastic place. RobertsonViolins.com is where you can go and see what their current offerings are. Thanks for sponsoring the podcast, Robertsons. Really appreciate it. And thank you also to Upton Bass String Instrument Company. They have been a longtime supporter, over 10 years of the blog and podcast, and they continue to grow and evolve and provide value to the double bass community. It seems like every other person that I have on the podcast has had a positive experience with Upton, whether it's getting a removable neck system put on or a bass custom design for them. And I think back to all the students I have had over the years that have purchased Upton basses and become raving fans for so many reasons. The instruments are great. The service is great. They work with you to determine what's best for your needs. And they have some fabulous stock models that they offer, including the car model double bass. Check them out at uptonbass.com. And thank you also to another longtime sponsor, D'Addario Strings. I've got D'Addario Strings on my bass now, and I've been using them for over 20 years. Their helicore strings are what I started out with at college, back at Northwestern University, and I was a big fan on that bass, at this German bass, of the hybrid strings. For me, they had just enough growl to work for jazz and other contexts, and they still responded really well and quickly under the bow. They've also got the pizzicato model. They've got solo strings. They've got orchestral variants. They've got heavy gauge, medium gauge, light gauge. So you will be able to find something that works well for your bass's needs. Thank you for sponsoring Desiree, and thank you to all the sponsors for the podcast. Super helpful. Makes me able to do what I do here. So back to our conversation with Karl, and we are going deep, folks, diving into auditioning. Again, break out that notepad if you can. Here we go. So you've taken quite a few auditions, but you had early success, right? I think Colorado Symphony, was that your fifth audition that you took, or fifth professional audition that you took?
Yeah.
Was Colorado? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Atlanta was your 21st?
That's right.
Okay. I got those right. So maybe we could just start with those early auditions. Like, what did you learn that you maybe propelled you into that job in that fifth audition? What did you learn between audition 1 and 5?
Well, there's a number of different things that I learned from different auditions. My first audition was my last semester of my master's degree, and it was for the National Symphony in 2006. And I went in, well prepared, but I was certainly very, very green in how I carried myself. The idea of understanding when the work is done so that you can kind of back off and allow yourself to rest a bit and absorb the training, that concept did not enter my mind yet. I think that what we have to do when preparing for a huge performance, it's much like a fighter, like a boxer, getting to a point of being in both the best condition you can be in while also being as rested as you can be. If you're too rested, then you lose conditioning. And if you condition too hard, then you're not rested enough. Mm-hmm. And finding that balance between the two, I was unaware of that concept at the time. So I fly in the day before the audition, or the day before my prelim day, and I get out my bass in my hotel room and I just start wailing away for like a few hours. I'm like, okay, I got to go through like my whole technique routine and a bunch of this repertoire. I wake up the next day, I get up in the morning, I go through my whole technique routine again, and I just start, running everything, all the solos, all the excerpts, everything, right? And then because I wasn't to play until about 5 p.m., 5:30 p.m. that day. So then I get to the hall, and I get a practice room about 45 minutes beforehand. So I'm just wailing away again, just going through everything from the list, from what they wanted me to play in the prelim round. Then they move me to a room that's just off stage for, my last 15, 20 minutes or something. And I'm just wailing away again, playing through everything. Because I'm thinking, if I can just get in enough repetitions of playing this really well many times in a row, then I go out there and I just have to play it just one more time. Like, I'll be ready to do that. So at the time, the logic made a lot of sense to me, but then I got out there, and it's a different feeling. Like, there's a different energy of being on stage by yourself playing an audition round. There's no other situation I can think of that feels quite like that. And it just, whatever amount of energy you have, it will take all of it from you really quickly, mentally and physically, which is why it's important to not just be in good condition, but to be rested at the same time. And I got out there, and I think I remember the first excerpt was Brahms 1 letter E, if I remember correctly. And I remember I was about to play, and I just thought, damn, I am so exhausted. Like, how am I going to get through this? And I did. But then by the end of it, Ein Heldenleben number 9, things like that, I was really I just didn't have gas left in the tank. And so I was making some errors by the end of the round that I usually didn't make. And, so right there, long story long, really, really big lesson that I learned, in that first audition is, so I went into my next audition, which was San Diego. And I advanced to the second round, and, that was a big, that was a big turn that kind of told me, okay, I can do this. Like I'm on the right track. But I approached that audition very differently. I flew in 2 days beforehand, and I didn't play at all the day that I flew. Played a little bit the next day, but was done by the afternoon. And I was in great condition. I was very rested, and I played really well in that first round. So I think that that's something that's really, really important is understanding, when the work is done, and it's not just that the second you leave, whatever city you live in to fly out to the audition, that the work is done. It's even before you leave. There's a point where, okay, the work is done. It's just a matter of starting to kind of ease off now, and just get used to playing through it. Hopefully you've worked everything to the point of it being good enough to win. And after that point, it's just maintain that, work on your consistency and being able to play through it and not overworking yourself. That is a really, really huge lesson. That has helped me a lot, because even when you are in great condition and well rested, and it's early in the day when you have the most energy you're going to have, and you play through a round of, 6, 7 excerpts or whatever. After that round is done, even if you went into it with the best situation, you're pretty much drained. Even in that situation, you don't have much left at that point. So that's the number one thing I think I would tell young players, and as far as entering the audition scene.
So, and it's great to hear that lesson learned so early, right? And I love it. I've got like 25 questions, but I'll try to only ask a few. So let's just talk quickly about even when you're really taking care of yourself and you play that round, you're drained. Okay, but then maybe that's the prelim round, and you've got a couple more rounds, over the next couple of days, perhaps, depending on the audition. Like, how do you get yourself back into optimal audition shape? You're drained. What do you do now that you're not on the round's done and you've advanced, let's say? What do you do? Do you then continue to play the bass, or do you go take a nap, or do you go for a run, or do you go eat some bananas, or what do you do?
The last thing that I'll do right after I do that is touch the instrument.
Yeah.
It's all about recuperating, getting your energy back. If the next round is the next day, then, that'll be easy. You'll have plenty of time to rest and recuperate. And I still, that's how it was when I won my audition here. We had prelims, semis, and finals were 3 different days. Back to back to back. And I did play the bass a little bit in between. I don't think that I really trusted, okay, the work is done. It's done. So I don't believe that I played the bass anymore that day. Yeah, I might have just a little bit. I might have taken it out and just very, moderate tempo, moderate, dynamic, just gone through the things that I hadn't had to play. I may have done that. Mm-hmm. I might have waited till the next day. I can't quite remember, but either way, not a lot of playing in between. Yeah. If the next round is that day, then I will not play another note until I'm back in my practice room, given my practice room to warm up for the next round. And in between, I'll definitely try to find something healthy to eat, drink plenty of water, listen to some music, or some meditational tunes, and get myself in a focused state again.
And you've mentioned I love that concept of just the work being done. If people could put themselves in that sort of mindset for an audition, what a healthy way, because then it's like a different part of the process. And maybe we can just talk about. And I know it rarely does a long-term plan work out 100% according to plan, but like for you, and you've taken a lot of auditions, so I'm assuming you've seen, this Atlanta Symphony audition or whatever previous audition is coming up. I see it on the calendar. It's coming up in 3-4 months, 5 months, whatever. What does your long-term plan look like? Maybe from the audition, you see the audition announcement to like wherever you conceive of the work being done. Can you just take us through that plan? Yeah,
definitely. That brings up another really important point. That I think that in order to get to your best conditioning for any audition, I think that there's no way to really do that unless you're already in good shape on your instrument when you begin the preparation. Because what we do as musicians, one way to think about it is that we really we're athletes. We're small muscle athletes. Mm-hmm. And we need to take that kind of care and that kind of responsibility. There have been times when it's for example, here's another thing that I learned. The first audition that I took after joining the Colorado Symphony was the Pittsburgh Symphony audition. And I had started my job that January, and it was a very different, it was a change. I wasn't in school anymore. I didn't hear people practicing all the time. So like, it was just completely up to me. I didn't have, I didn't have that kind of ingrained motivation in the curriculum. It was just, I got done with my first rehearsal. Everyone takes off and goes home, and I'm backstage, and it was like a ghost town. And I thought, man, this is different. School doesn't prepare you for this. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, it was tough, for a while. Like I was staying in good enough shape to do my job. I was still doing my job in the symphony fine, but it was pretty, I would say, average conditioning at best. And then the Pittsburgh Symphony audition came up, and that kind of jolted me. And I said, okay, now I can really practice. And I worked really hard on it for several weeks. And then by the end of that process, I felt like I was, I'm in really good shape again. I take the audition. I played pretty well. I did not advance. And I remember thinking, right now at this moment, I feel like I'm in the condition that I need to be in to begin preparing. Because when you're not in good shape, you're going to be spending, that first month of preparation, you're you're going to be spending, even if you are, working a lot on the repertoire, most of that is really going to be absorbed by just getting yourself to a good baseline of conditioning, and I think that you have to have that first before any of your work on the repertoire to be able to really take hold, so that you can be consistent when it counts, when the nerves are all fired up and everything. So then I realized, there isn't an easy way about it. This is a new chapter. Like, I'm not going to be in school anymore. I'm not going to have people around that are constantly going to be motivating me just by the fact that I hear them practicing in the hall with 50 practice rooms, at this point I have to take full responsibility for all of this. And, there isn't really an easy way about it, for anyone who finds themselves in this situation. I don't think there's really a secret. It's commitment. You have to make the commitment and decide that you're dedicated and that you're just going to get up and you're going to practice anyway. It's like a relationship, and, you go through this rough patch where maybe you don't want to play so much, but you do it anyway. And then you get through that and you realize how much you really do love the instrument.
Yeah.
And, it really is like that. You don't experience that until you're out of school and kind of on your own and have to take responsibility for it. So that would be the first thing I would make sure that everyone knows, is that you have to be in pretty good shape, when you start preparing. And then for me, after that point, I'll spend probably 6 to 8 weeks. The first month I'll spend doing a lot of work with the metronome, going back to basics and working things up one click at a time. Then the second month I'll usually start playing for people and really getting in there and focusing on the specific things that need work on. It's like a game of whack-a-mole, at that point where one sticks its head up, you knock it down, another sticks its head up, and so on and so forth. And then the original one sticks its head up again, even though you thought you took care of that. And you keep sanding it down until everything is kind of flat, And, yeah, in a general sense, that's how I approach it.
And so at a certain point, the work is done, and that might be a week before the audition. That could be a couple weeks before the audition. Is that a date that you try to set, or is that a moment that you just realize in your preparation?
It's not a date that I try to set.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that, generally about 2 weeks out from the audition, what I try to do is I try to get to a point where 2 weeks out from the audition, if I took my, what I've done up until that point, it should be good enough to win. Mm-hmm. Like I want my playing to be good enough to win 2 weeks before the audition. And then that next week, there might be a little bit of shedding that I might do, but it's mainly just running through it, getting used to that, taking mental notes of, what needs the attention. I might be running through it a couple times a day. Then the last week, I think all the 100% of the shedding is done by then and should be done by then. And at that point, I might just be, getting up, doing a brief warm up of maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and taking a little break and then running it through once, and then, recording it probably, and then just putting it away for the rest of the day. And that's, I would say, generally kind of how it works out. But there's not an exact date that I'm setting. It's something I'm keeping my eye on, and I sort of know when it's there.
And, a question I've gotten asked a lot, or asked to ask people, in positions like yours, because I think a lot of people do get, I don't know if trapped is the right word, but that, they get a job and then they are just unable, through whether it's motivation to stay in shape, like you're talking about, or lifestyle things, they just are unable to get out of that position. And the question of how on earth do you audition for a job when you have another job? You were just talking about that, keeping the motivation up and everything. In terms of the actual day, like when you're in school, yeah, you got classes or orchestra, whatever, but you have a lot of discretionary time that you just don't have with an 8-service-a-week job. Like, how did you schedule, just in terms of like your day-by-day schedule, how did you schedule in the time you needed with a full-time orchestra job?
Well, you put it in wherever you can fit it, first of all. But, one thing that was always very important was mornings. And if I'm getting up and I'm getting to the hall, or whether it's the hall or whether it's the living room, doing a solid hour at least of scales, arpeggios, whatever other technique I want to do. That sets the whole day. Once the foot is solidly in that door, it's easy to stay there for the rest of the day, because everything after that goes better. You feel better in rehearsal, and that goes smoother. It's a more satisfying experience than, let's say, you grab your bass, you tune it, you do a 10-minute warm-up backstage, and then you go out and you play. Like, that just never feels as good.
Yeah.
Just doesn't.
Yeah.
And you kind of set it up that way. So the rehearsal goes better, you feel better about yourself when the rehearsal's done. And, you feel positive, so you have more motivation to practice, and it's a momentum thing. You kind of get the ball rolling in the morning. It's easier to keep it going mentally. And, I would never wait too long after morning rehearsal to practice again. I would maybe go somewhere, get some lunch, go back to the hall, grab a practice room while it hasn't been too long out of the loop, and then just kind of like ripping off a Band-Aid and getting in the practice room and just going.
Yeah.
The rest of the afternoon until dinner, and then probably be done by then. Occasionally take another break and then come back and do a little bit more if say I had to, if maybe I had other responsibilities in the middle of that afternoon that kind of kept me from practicing directly after rehearsal, then I just kind of displace it. But I think that the important thing is it's just getting that ball rolling. It's funny. I remember watching a video when I was a sophomore in college. My roommate at CIM was a violist, and he had a VHS tape of a class/lecture that Karen Tuttle gave, the very famous viola pedagogue. And she said something that's always stuck with me. She said, any day I don't feel like practicing, the second I take out the instrument and play a note, I want to practice. Like, at that point, if you just make that step, at that point, what's the likelihood that you say, no, I'm not going to do this, I'm just going to put it back in the case? there's no way. I don't think there's really a secret. It's just ripping off that Band-Aid and getting the ball rolling. And then once it's going, just not allowing yourself to get out of it long enough to lose momentum.
It's like a runner waking up and not wanting to go for a run, but you put on those sneakers and you set out the door and you start to get the pace going and you're like, wait a minute, I do want to go for a run. I just thought I didn't. Outside of the bass, so just speaking of running, made me think of it. Like, is there anything that you do regularly or did regularly in terms of like just staying fit away from the instrument? Any sort of like daily practice, swimming, running, weightlifting, meditation, anything along those lines?
Yeah, well, for a good while, I mean, I've always really enjoyed, calisthenics, push-ups, pull-ups, just kind of body weight strength exercises. That's something that has helped me whenever I have a routine of that, I find that I can practice longer, especially, the areas of my body that have a tendency to get tighter, like my upper back, for example. It helps me with endurance in playing the instrument since it is such a physical instrument. I mean, and there's lots of different things that people can do. I've also incorporated some running because I think that cardiovascular work is good too, because I mean, after all, when you're in a setting like an audition and the heart rate is going crazy, if that's the first time you've gotten your heart rate like that since the last time you took an audition, I think it'll be a little more of a shock to the system as opposed to, being in better physical health.
You get a great full-time job and then another full-time job. But obviously, it's way more circuitous than that. I'm sure if you're like most people. But if you could go back and talk to like 18-year-old Karl, let's say, or that was just about to go to CIM, studying with Dennis Whitaker, and now here you are in the Atlanta Symphony and you've done what you've done, taken all these auditions, experienced what you've experienced. Like what advice would you give that 18-year-old Karl?
Well, I would, I think that I would tell myself to, stay the course. Something that I stubbornly fixated myself on anyway. When I went to school, I remember my freshman year at CIM. On the bulletin board outside the bass studio, there was an audition posted for the Seattle Symphony, I think. And this was like 2000, 2001, something like that. I remember thinking like, I know that I'm so far away. I know that I'm so far away from being ready to take that audition, but it excites me. Like it excites me. I always had this idea in my head that, this is what I'm going to do. I believe I'm talented enough to make it happen, and I'm going to stay the course. I think the first thing that I would tell 18-year-old Karl is that that mentality is right. Don't lose it. The next thing I would tell 18-year-old Karl, and this is something that I actually have gotten hung up on from time to time, is, as long as I do what I have to do, and I do it every day, just focus on that. And don't focus on what other people are doing. There are times when you can get threatened by that as a younger player, someone else your age or younger, and they're playing this and they're performing that and they sound like this, and I'm not doing that yet or whatever. And that's okay. I mean, that is something that did get in my head from time to time and, obstruct positive thinking, and it's really just a waste of energy, because at the end of the day, you can only control the things that are within your power to control, which is what you're doing. It's not what anyone else is doing. And, we don't all develop at the same rate, and, sometimes it is like the case of the tortoise versus the hare. And there are people who can kind of just spring up really fast. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to go farther than you. Because I had a really good teacher. His name was Ken Harper. He taught me at the Round Top Festival for a few summers, and then later became a colleague. I became a colleague of his in the Colorado Symphony before he passed away. And he said something that has stuck with me. And he said, "It's not about the hand that you're dealt. It's about how you play that hand." And as long as you are, regardless of what set of tools you have at this moment versus what anyone else has at this moment, it's about the long game and how you use those tools and how you focus them over time. And you just have to worry about that. And when you hear someone else play and they sound incredible, and say they're younger than you and they sound incredible, there's no reason to be threatened by that. There's only reason to be inspired by it and find out what it is that you can learn from it, and then just put that into playing your hand the way you can play your hand. I mean, I would absolutely tell that to myself as an 18-year-old.
And, I'm sure on this journey, of the win your fifth audition and then you get into the Atlanta Symphony or 21st audition, I mean, that shows some tenacity there, right? That's a lot of auditions, and very easy for someone to say, forget it, I got a good job, whatever. Like, how did you keep pushing through? Was there a low point during all those auditions? And if so, like, how did you get through that?
There's been more than one low point, there have been ups and downs, and I've just kept moving forward is the important thing. The first thing that comes to mind is throughout my first several auditions, I went to National Symphony, didn't advance, went to San Diego, advanced, went to Cleveland, didn't advance, went to Calgary, and I was one of the last few people left. Won Colorado. Then after that, I had Pittsburgh, Minnesota, Boston, New York, Philadelphia. Didn't advance. And in between all of those, I had the audition for assistant principal in Colorado, and I made the finals, but didn't quite get it. And so I did hit this rut where, if it was an audition of, for lack of a better term, and I don't mean it offensively in any way, more of a mid-range orchestra, I would kind of rip through it like gangbusters. But if it was an orchestra that was, had a higher competition level, and also orchestras of that nature generally have bigger lists, then I wasn't getting anywhere. And so that was a big hump I had to get over. And I had a real sense of urgency. It was scary. I thought, man, when I decided that I wanted to do this when I was in high school, and I was checking out all those records that I told you about from my high school library, I fell in love with the Chicago Symphony and the Philadelphia Orchestra and the Cleveland Orchestra. And, I thought, I want to keep going until I reach something like that. And so it was, it was really disconcerting. Like, is this where I'm stuck? Am I not good enough to keep progressing? And so one summer, after our summer season was done with the Colorado Symphony, I wasn't that far removed from school. And so I went out to Aspen Festival to visit some friends, and I saw the Chamber Symphony play. And one of my friends who had a job, someone who I knew, who was a bass player in in a symphony of very similar kind of parallel level to the Colorado Symphony, and about my age, was there as a student. And I thought, well, I mean, I'm just down the road. And if they're okay with having young people who have jobs in orchestras of that level as a student, then this is something I'm going to pursue. So after having a job in the Colorado Symphony, I then went to Aspen as a student for 4 summers and studied with Laszlo and played in many master classes for both Bruce Bransby and Chris Hanulik, and just absorbed as much as I could. And I became a much better bass player and a much better musician as a result. You know, it opened my eyes up to a lot of things that I needed to be doing in my playing. It made me a lot better. You know, one thing about those auditions for bigger orchestras, you know, the lists are bigger. And so I found myself with where I was technically as a player, having a difficult time getting that amount of repertoire at a consistent level and the amount of time it takes to prepare for an audition. Now, maybe if I had another month of preparation on top of it, I would get it all there. But at that point, you know, 3 months for one audition, it's, you know, I'm going to burn out by the time that comes up. So being able to get it to a consistent level in a reasonable amount of time, I just wasn't able to do that because I needed to get better at the instrument. You know, I would spend so much time working out, you know, drilling things and working out technical aspects of clarity and intonation. Like I remember for my second audition, which was the San Diego Symphony, I remember playing things so slowly for so long and drilling things over and over and over at a slow tempo just to get the intonation consistently. And I ended up doing very well in that audition. But when the list is so much bigger, it spreads you thin. Mm-hmm. So it really kind of shows what you're capable of doing on the spot. So it was a big hump that I had to get over, and I had to keep going at it and figuring out how I need to improve as a bass player and continuing to study in the summer. And then my 13th audition was for the Cleveland Orchestra, my second time, and then I made the semifinals. And so that was a big hump for me. And it took me 3 years from the Pittsburgh audition, which was my first audition after having a job in Colorado, to the Cleveland audition 3 years later, and 5 or 6 auditions in between, you know, where, you know, I finally kind of got over that hump and started advancing in auditions like that. And then I was sort of at a new place at that point. So, you know, you have to be very, very vigilant and diligent in your own continuing education. Because, you know, one thing I've learned is that when you graduate and you get your degrees, you know, that sets you up to have a strong foundation so that you can continue to learn. It's more that than it is you've learned what you need. I mean, there are some people who, you know, they're 22 years old, they're getting their bachelor's degree, and they win a job at the New York Philharmonic, and they're done. You know, good for them. Or maybe straight out of master's, you know, they get a job playing in San Francisco and, you know, never take an audition again. But that's not how it is for a lot of us. And so for those of us who are not in that boat, we have to be very, very accountable for our own continued development, and have the idea of being a perpetual student, really. And since then, I've had low points certain auditions that I've had high hopes for, and it didn't work out. And I had much higher expectations for how things were going to go. You know, without going into the specifics of which auditions, it's always can be devastating and heartbreaking in that moment. But if you have decided ahead of time and you are committed to the idea that you're going to keep going, you're going to learn from it, you're going to progress from it, then the disappointment will work its way out of your system, and then you go back to the drawing board again. You have to learn to love the process, you know, to love the journey, if you will.
A clarinetist in the San Francisco Symphony here named Jerry Seamus, I've known for years. He was talking to me about when he finally the first audition where he made the finals for like a bit. I don't remember if it was New York or what it was exactly, but he was like looking around at who was in the finals, and he was thinking like, I don't belong in this room. These are all people that are, you know, XYZ or in this and this. And then he just had that moment. He's like, wait a minute, I'm here just like them. I do belong in this room. What? And that was like a
That's
huge,
right.
Did you have a moment like that at that Cleveland audition? Did it feel like that at all?
You know, now that you mention it, yeah, it felt great. And I would say those next few auditions, the next couple after that, I kind of put them into one kind of group because it kind of reinforced that idea. You know, the kind of green room, it was sort of a who's who of bass players, you know, and we're all there together. That was when I started to kind of believe. That's when I was like, wait a second, I do belong here? You know, I'm not, hold on, you know. And then my next audition was for principal bass of Minnesota Orchestra. That's the one when Alex Hanna won, but he never began because he won his position in Chicago. And I was really proud of that audition because I was in the semifinals. There are 5 of us. I was the only candidate who they advanced out of the prelims. And that kind of added another kind of jolt where I got a little bit closer to believing, like, wait, maybe this isn't a fluke, you know. And then the next audition a few months later was the Cleveland Orchestra audition when Derek Zadinsky was hired, and was in the final round, after which he was hired. It was kind of a big final round, but it was a final round. And that was kind of the moment, I think, where I thought, okay, 3 times in a row now, like this isn't a fluke. This is where I am now. Like, now I'll be one of the people that someone else will say, oh yeah, Karl, he was in the finals with me in such and such a place. So I would say that process began with the Cleveland audition when I advanced, and over the next couple of auditions, it kind of ingrained that feeling that I now really truly am on a different level of competitiveness. And it was it was a checkpoint. It was an important checkpoint along the path.
Well, and it sounds like that those Aspen summers had a lot to do with it, just in terms of the, you know, getting you to that point where you then were, you know, moving ahead to Cleveland. And I don't know the best way to ask this, but like, was it, you were mentioning that the more extensive audition list was a real barrier for some of these groups. So was it just getting some more focused, guided woodshedding and specific excerpts, or was it kind of like an overall elevation of your technique in general, or was it a way that you learned to like approach those bigger lists? Like, what do you think? And I know this is all cumulative, you know, everything builds on everything, but like, do you have any thoughts on like what specifically was unlocked for you with that time at Aspen?
It really was a big part of it. I would say the biggest part of it was just my technical improvement in general. Like my first lesson with Albert Laszlo, I played some things for him. I played the recitative, and I played the bérets from the Third Suite. And he immediately just started. He knew exactly what to say and what to do, and started going to work. And it was one of those lessons where, you have those lessons where the sky kind of opens up and you realize, oh my God, like that's, of course, right? And he completely changed my left-hand position, my left-hand posture, and showed me just kind of how I was working against myself and had been for so many years. That was a really important point. And then over the summers, we worked a lot on expanding the tone and making it more focused and increasing the projection, and also greatly clarifying the articulation. I continued to work on all of that and have continued to, but that kind of redirected me. I would say that first lesson even really did that. It's like, it's just a slight turn. And as you go down that path a little bit, you're still very close to where you would have been otherwise, to the other path. But the further you go, the further away you are from where you would have been, if that makes sense. And it's just that slight repositioning and then going down. It can make all the difference in the world. So I do think it was, a big part of it was that. And then another part on top of it was that there were certain excerpts that, for whatever reason, were more challenging for me. And, getting those up to where they needed to be, and just elevating everything in general to a higher level.
If ever there was a testament for continuing education, that's great, because it's like one repositioning and just thinking a little bit differently about the left hand. Something like that can make such a huge difference. Even if you are at a point like where you were at, with a full-time job, you'd done all this, but you never know when that next breakthrough is going to come.
That's right. And, one thing that I started to do also is I really fell in love with, studying with Laszlo. I really fell in love with chromatic scales. I mean, it's so simple, but so challenging at the same time. Just being able to move half step to half step and to do it very, very consistently in all registers of the instrument. I think that if you can't do that, then I think everything else, diatonic scales, scales and thirds, arpeggios, as the intervals expand, are more challenging. And so in my scale practice, I've started to kind of use that as my basis, where I will do chromatic work before I move on even to diatonic scales. And for me personally, it's helped me a lot.
Man, this is going to be so useful. Thanks for chatting. I know this is great.
Absolutely.
There you have it, my conversation with Karl Fenner. And Karl and I have already talked about doing a round 2 on some related topics. So looking forward to getting that out soon. And I said this at the opening, I'm going to say it again. I get so much out of this kind of conversation. It reminds me why I love connecting with people that have won a major position like Karl's spot in the Atlanta Symphony. And it's because it's all about process. It's all about coming up with a long-term plan and executing on that plan. And I am not currently taking orchestra auditions, nor do I have any desire, I don't think, to take in the near future. But I learn so much from these conversations that I then transfer into other aspects of my life, whether it's podcasting. I like to think that I'm getting better at this. Hopefully I'm getting better over time. I apply it to my bass practicing. I've got a solo recital coming up, and the way that Karl prepares, I've already taken some of this mindset and long-term preparation, outlook, and all these sort of things that Karl and I talked about, and I've been applying it to my own life. So even if I never put this podcast out and no one heard it except me by myself or chatting with Karl, I still get a huge benefit. So the added benefit for me with the podcast, that's why it's a total win-win to spend my time doing this, is that I get so much out of this personally that helps me as an artist, as a person, in all the things that I do. And then I get to send this out and share this with you wherever you happen to be. And I get so many great responses from folks knowing that this is helping people. So how cool is that? Love the unique role that I have in the bass world, in the music world. And I would love to hear from you. Did you dig this episode? What did you dig about it? Would you like to hear more like this? Anything about a specific topic, a guest? Let me know. Feedback at contrabassconversations.com will put you in touch with me. I respond to every message I get, and it brightens my day. Really, sounds cheesy, but it does. I open up my email and I read messages from people all over the globe and what they're enjoying and what they'd like to hear more of. And that just fills me with such positivity and joy. So thank you for doing that. Those of you that have, and I'm just so appreciative because I know I hear podcasters say that, and I so rarely write into shows I listen to. And so I know what a big ask that is. And I'm just so thankful when people do, because I'm in the other role so often. So anyway, I will stop talking. This has been a value-packed episode for sure. Really hope you enjoyed it. Many more like this coming your way here on Contrabass Conversations, your home for life on the low end of the spectrum.